All right, I think we're ready to go here. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Redgate's webinar on database lifecycle management. Today we're going to cover a specific suite of tools. We're doing these monthly, and each month we're trying to pick a different set of tools so that you can see how well we work with TFS versus Git versus TeamCity versus Jenkins or something else. So each month we're going to vary the tools a little bit and give you a chance to see how things work. So if you have requests, there's things you'd like to do, please let us know what you're interested in. So with that in mind, let's move on. I'm Steve Jones. I'm going to run most of the webinar today and show you the demos and the tools and things. I run SQL Server Central, which is how a lot of people know about me, but I've been working in the database world for 25 years now. I've been working with a variety of platforms, primarily SQL Server since version 4.2 back in the early 90s, and I've worked with all the versions since then, and as we were just chatting about a minute, including SQL Server 2016 to date. All my contact information is up there on the screen, so please feel free to get a hold of me if you want to, or get a hold of somebody at Redgate. I've worked in big industries, big companies, small companies, healthcare, financial industry, education, power, utilities, different things. So I've seen a lot of different things work over the years in a lot of different ways, and what we show today is kind of a formalized version of things I've done in the past that have worked really, really well. Now, I run SQL Server Central, but I do work for Redgate Software, and I'm an evangelist for Redgate. I travel around speaking and writing about Redgate as well as SQL Server. Redgate is a company that builds software tools. We try to help you build software better, and so we sell to thousands of companies all over the world. Hundreds of thousands of professionals use our tools and love them, and you can see a number of things on the screen here. We try to build these simple, ingeniously designed tools that help you solve problems and make you work faster. That's really why you pay us. And then we also support the community. So Redgate, obviously they hired me, but they pay for me to travel around to speak and write about SQL Server at different events. They support SQL Server Central and Simple Talk as free resources for you to learn more about SQL Server and more about software development. So I know we have a poll now. Let's see if any of you use Redgate tools. Why don't we run that real quick while we've got a moment, and then I want to let Arnie introduce himself. Arnie's one of our sales engineers at Redgate. Arnie, what have you done or what do you do on a regular basis here?
Hi, Steve. Hi, everyone. So I'm Arnie Iskandari. I've been working with Redgate for about 5 years, and over the past 5 years, I've worked with a lot of Redgate customers. As part of a sales engineering role, I've helped them basically implement our tools and get set up with a continuous integration and continuous delivery process using whatever infrastructure they already have or they were looking to implement on both the application code and the SQL Server side of things. So, and that's what I'm basically currently focusing on too and working on as part of my role.
All right. So if you have more detailed questions, Arnie's one of our sales engineers that might help you, and he certainly helps me at times. I have to ask him questions too, because the tools will change at times. So, all right.
Yeah. Well, on that note, I just want to let everyone know that we are going to have a Q&A at the end of the webinar. So please feel free to post your questions using the panel of GoToWebinar, and then we'll try to answer as many of those as possible.
Yeah, thanks for that. I forgot to mention that. Yeah, so please ask questions throughout, or ask questions at the end. We'll do them. Try to get everything answered. So let me move on real quick. I want to get through just a few things in slides, and then really spend most of the time on demo. So the slide I have up now, I think when the poll closes, you'll see it talks about some of the issues with database deployments. Now, I'm sure many of you do deployments. You update software, you change your databases, and it's funny that when I talk to people, I often hear them say, we have a good process and things work, but then I'll also hear them complain about the problems that go into it, the manual work that comes in creating scripts, the issues when we try to deploy and we have issues and we either roll back or we have to fix a script on the fly. All kinds of things go on, and among this list that I have on the screen, I think everybody experiences these to some degree or another one. And there are difficult problems to solve, and I don't want to make light of this or imply that any of you are not talented database developers or DBAs, but these are hard problems, and the more often that you can kind of reduce the risk and reduce the friction in making change, the smoother your process flows. And it's not just about being fast or making changes quickly, but it's more about having confidence in reducing risk so that your users don't have outages, but more important, they trust that you can make changes. Your developers trust that their changes will get through to production and they'll be able to get to users and get feedback. All of those things result in a much smoother process that in fact allows you to operate more efficiently. Now, my screen doesn't want to work. There are companies that implement what they call application lifecycle management, or ALM, which is kind of an overreaching way of looking at software, not only from just, I have to get this version done, but from how do I get requirements from users and architect things, get feedback from production, and then make a smooth process. At Redgate, we've kind of coined the DLM term, which more and more companies are using now, and that's trying to look at the database change or the database software as a whole overreaching process, right? A whole life cycle where we try to build in repeatability, we try to build in confidence that things will work, and that really goes through automation. That's the primary means of we doing that. Now, speed of response is a big deal. A lot of people talk about that, but it's not so much that I want to get those changes deployed so quickly. It's more that I want to have my development effort get to customers and get feedback on whether they're good or bad changes. And that's challenging in the database world, but that's certainly what we want to do. And then we want to have reliability in our release process. We don't want a release to be once a year where everybody stresses out that we're going to make all these changes and we're worried they'll either work or that we'll have to restore from backup. We want to release changes on a regular basis, whatever that means, right? Every day, every week, every month, every quarter, but in a way that gives you confidence that you're actually going to make those changes and they'll work correctly. Now, DevOps is a term or an idea that a lot of people talk about in the last 5 years or so, but really, DevOps is something that has been around for decades. I mean, I've been doing DevOps for most of my career, actually. I was fortunate enough to work with some groups and some people that really treated software as a craft, and they wanted things to work well, and so they implemented processes that weren't heavyweight, they weren't hard, but they really were just repeatable processes that involve both technology and how we built software as well as people. So DevOps involves developers talking to operational people so that they ensure that the environments that are set up in development and test and stage and everywhere else look like production, at least as closely as possible, so we have confidence that changes we make in those environments will also work in production. It's developers also talking to operational staff to understand what we need to do to make sure the software deploys smoothly into the operational area. So it's communication, getting information from there. And then the same thing for operational people, that they treat development as a client and they're happy to put up those environments and ensure that they're configured and ready to go just like the production environments. And they feed back information from operations on how things perform or what works or doesn't work. And as you can see from the State of DevOps report a couple of years ago, people that run these ideas, right, what we call DevOps now, they deploy code more oftenly, but more importantly, they do it with much more confidence, with less issues as well. And this results in efficiency, which means from the managerial standpoint, from the owner standpoint, we have the ability to do better than our competitors. We end up at a higher profit level or a bigger market share or something else. And it's really about we don't have as much friction, we don't have as many things that cause us issues and cause us to waste time. So what can Redgate do here? As I said, we've kind of been working this DLM area as an extension to some of the tools that many of you use, like prompt and compare, which are kind of point tools to solve little problems. This is trying to make the whole entire process simpler. So I've got this diagram that we've put together, and what it tries to do is look at the entire software lifecycle process. Now at the top we're showing kind of the database world, but really if you do application development, the top slice of this looks exactly the same. It's the same type of thing. And so on the left we have developers, and it could be database developers, application developers. They're people that are actually writing code, so they're making changes. And you know, in the database world, that's typically a Management Studio or Visual Studio. It could be something like Rapid SQL or something else. But in the application world, it's Visual Studio, Eclipse, IntelliJ, PyCharm, something like that. In any case, we make changes and we store everything in a version control system, and that's really key. That provides us a stable point from which we can look at our code at any point in time and understand what is the state of every particular module or object or class or method or anything else. In Redgate, we've got a number of tools for developers, and then we also link to source control system. And if you look across the bottom, you can see that there's a variety of platforms listed. And so in the version control area, we integrate with and link with TFS or Git or Subversion or Vault or Perforce or SourceSafe or CVS or there's any number of systems that we integrate with there. So we want to give you the choice, but we want you to use this kind of system. And the idea here is that developers will write code, and it could be create statements, could be alter statements, could be whatever, but we stick that stuff into version control always as create statements. And the reason we do this is because we always want to see all the code when we look at the most current version of an object. So for a table, if you were to go and look at the last version of code for that table, if it's an alter statement that adds a column or adds a constraint, you also then have to go back and look at previous versions to figure out what does the table really look like. If I'm trying to debug a problem or trying to see what works or doesn't work. In our case, we give the entire statement and then we work on later in the process giving you the alters. From version control, the next step we move into the middle is continuous integration. And continuous integration involves building and assembling your software together, running tests against it in an automated fashion, perhaps syncing it with some other system, which I'll show you today, and then publishing out a package that is what the potential release candidates for your software. So for Java world, it's a jar file. In the .NET stack, it's either a DLL or an exe or an MS build, or sorry, not an MSI file, something that we can potentially install into the next environments, right? In the database world, it really is a look at your database state and the changes that need to be made to upgrade a database. Now, right now, I've got a SQL CI product here, which we do sell. We've deprecated that a bit, and the SQL Release product is really going to cover both of these stages, and it's going to allow you to build a database, test it, publish out a package, sync it, all of those processes that you need to do. We're doing that through PowerShell interfaces. And then at the bottom, you can see we integrate with a number of CI servers. So we'll work with TFS Build or TeamCity or Jenkins or Bamboo, or really almost, I think, any CI build server that you want to use. Once we've done a CI build, assuming we've passed all our tests, we would move into the next stage, which is prepare to deploy this software. If it doesn't pass, obviously we would feedback to the developers and let them know what's going on. But in this case, we have to build some sort of deployment script. For an application, like I said, it could be an MSI file, it could be a jar file, something that's going to be deployed to my QA environment or my staging environment or something else, and of course production. In the database world, this means ensuring that I have the correct alter statements or create statements, drop statements as needed to deploy my software to any of the following databases, right? The testing, the QA, staging, pre-production, user acceptance, production, anywhere that I have to go. There's a lot of tools that do this. Certainly some of the CI tools will do this. Like Bamboo kind of does both. You could use TeamCity, but we integrate with anything you want to use. If you want to use release management in TFS and Visual Studio, we can do that. If you want to use Octopus Deploy, which we really like Octopus Deploy, if you've got something else you want to do, we're going to give you the ability to plug into that. And as long as that particular product can hit a command line and execute PowerShell, we'll allow you to do that. Of course, you always want to deploy in stages, right? So you're going to run through at least a test environment, if nothing else. But eventually you're going to go to production, and then we want you to monitor what you've deployed, because in the past I've seen companies where software developers want to kind of throw software over the wall and be done with it. But unless you get feedback, does that feature actually work? Is it helpful? Is it saving time? Is it complete? Apart from bugs, there's all these types of feedback we want to have, including does it perform well? And so at Redgate, we've got DLM Dashboard to help you track deployments and see what's changing in your database, as well as SQL Monitor performance. We want you to feed that information back to development and then have this cycle repeat over and over and over again. All right. We've done a lot here.
Hey, Steve.
Yeah.
There's a quick question from David Wilson. So the question is, you mentioned DDL for deployment. What about data? Many of our products have a default data in the database that also need to be managed.
Exactly. All right, David, you know what? I'm going to delay you for just a minute because I'm actually going to show you some of this. So hold on just a minute. If I don't answer your question, then please ping us again. But for now, let me flip over here and let's actually just see how this works. And I will cover data in here. So I like to start with DLM Dashboard. And the reason is because this gives me a nice view of how this software pipeline works together and how this DLM process actually exists. And then we'll go back through the entire process. And so DLM Dashboard is designed to track essentially schema. So is anything changing in my schema? And so you can see here I've got a few different pipelines. If I close this, you can see I've got 3 pipelines set up in this demo environment. One of them is a simple talk pipeline. I'm not tracking any development instances, and I go back and forth on this. Some people like to track what happens in development, some don't. I tend not to track development databases because they change too often. Right? I want developers to experiment and do things. They may make changes and undo them. I don't really want to know what's changing there. What I really care about is when we get to an integration environment or an environment where all of the changes from all developers are put together. Some of you may work on a shared database. In that case, that would be this database. Some of you, work in individual databases, and then eventually you have to merge everything into some server together. But in any case, you want that environment. And that's what I have here. This is my integration environment. The way that this works, I have a server, a database, a history list, right? This is where I am currently. And here's the last CI build. And we track this so that you can kind of see things changing. As you can see, I'm at version 14 here. I'm also at version 14 in test, acceptance, and production. These are all green, and this one is amber or orange. Now, the way that things flow is typically my CI process updates this database, right? And this could have my data in it. It could have all kinds of stuff. This is a place for me to look at things in a development environment. Eventually, it goes to testing, where typically my QA people would now be able to exercise the application against the test environment in a non-automated fashion, right? Automated tests would typically occur in integration. Here I'm seeing non-automated tests. We go to acceptance. That gives me a pre-production environment where I can be sure that I'm going to deploy this to production and it's going to work. Also, customers potentially would look at it there. Then eventually I go to production. Now, in this case, production is amber because on this last deployment, after the change is made, I didn't acknowledge that I understood the change had been made. In this case, if nobody has acknowledged this, this will appear amber. So if I click the review button, I can kind of see what happened. In this case, I was resetting my demo environment here. You can see I've got my lovely poor coding practice here in the production, and I see the previous version. And so I can leave a comment. This would track to my user ID and account, acknowledge the changes, and then what we would see is that everything is green again. Now, I certainly could go back and look at history across time of all the deployments I've done. I'm not going to do that now. This will kind of be our tracking tool as we deploy changes from one environment to another, and we'll see the changes kind of go through here and update this environment. So let me go over to my actual demo environment. Let's zoom in a little. So I'm going to work in this area. This is essentially my development environment. I've got 2 databases here, Simple Talk databases. They're named for Grant and Steve. We're the 2 guys that do this stuff a lot. I guess we should add one for Arnie at some point here, but these would typically live on each of our laptops, not on the same instance, right? I would have mine on my laptop or my desktop. Grant would have his own, etc. We also then have our integration environment. This would typically live on its own server where all the developers could get to and they could look at it. Potentially we would do performance testing or some type of other analysis with code. Obviously we have a test environment as well where QA would look at things. Again, this would typically be on its own instance. For simplicity's sake, I have it on this instance. We have a UAT environment. We won't use this today, but I do know companies that do use UAT. We, of course, have production here where we would deploy it. And then up here, just because of alphabetical naming, here's my acceptance environment where typically I'm going to restore this from production so that I know what production looks like. I'll deploy here as a test, and if this works, I'll actually move things on to production. So this entire list is really going to be our environment today that we look at. Now you'll notice I've selected my dev database here. Over on the right-hand pane, what we actually have is SQL Source Control. It's a product from Redgate that allows me to link my database to a version control system. In this case, you can see I've linked it to this repository. This is actually a Git repository. This is the same path here. And this path is what contains all of my code. Now, SQL Compare and Redgate SQL Source Control build this structure where they put all of my code in here. For example, here are the actual files. And then SQL Source Control manages updating the repository and version control from the database and vice versa. So I know some of you probably use different source control systems or version control systems. Amy, can we run that second poll and just see what people use here? Hopefully that's popped up. Now, I like Git. Git's a distributed system like Mercurial, which allows me to work offline, and I really like it for that reason because I have a desktop and 2 laptops, and I travel around, and there's times where I want to experiment with something, and I want to save that code while I'm traveling. I could be on an airplane or at a different event, and so I like Git for that reason. I use TFS just for testing purposes, and I've used Subversion in the past. They all work fine. There's nothing I would say is better or worse than any of them, really. They'll all allow you to do the functions you need to do, which is store your code there and get it back. You certainly could do this with file save and file open, and I've done that in the past, but it's a little bit cumbersome. We like to have something that in an automated fashion that works well, and so SQL Source Control is built to do that. It's built to make things easy. So let's close that poll and move on. You'll notice I have a number of tabs up there at the top. We allow you to lock objects. We allow you to build migration scripts and those kinds of things. And then we have this get latest and commit changes, which you can see as I click on it, it goes and actually looks at the repository and looks at my system and tries to decide is there anything changed. And as you can see, nothing's changed. So let's make a change. I've got a table. Let me change the store procedure first. We can do this. Let's change this one because I don't want to break anything. You can see not a great coding practice with select star. I can easily fix this. Let me remove a few things here because we don't always want all columns. We don't want to pull back data that we don't need. So I can change this. I could continue to run tests, do things, right, experiment with this, make sure the application works on my laptop. Whatever I want to do, I do it here and see that things work, right? Let me also go in here and look at data because Dave asked about data. You'll see I have a number of tables. One of those tables is country codes, and if I look at this, you'll see, I've got all this data that you might expect here, right? All these kinds of things. And I also have these RSS feeds. And if I right-click here, SQL Source Control has added some items to my context menu, and one of those items is actually to link or unlink static data. In this case, it gives me a list of tables. You can see that my country codes and my RSS feeds are in fact linked, and what this means is that we're storing this data in our version control system. So if I were to come in here, right, I altered the store procedure. You'll notice I'm not saving that code. Let's insert RSS feeds, and we'll add Tuesday because I'm not too creative here. And I'll add a 0 here. I don't think it really matters what I add. In any case, I've just changed data, and this would be considered that reference data, static data, lookup data that I want in all of my environments. So now when I go to look at version control, you'll see, in fact, it's actually tracked this, and let's refresh it again because I just made a data change. You'll see here that on the right-hand side is what's in version control, and on the left-hand side is what's in the database. And if we look here, you actually see there's an insert statement here. Here is that insert that would correspond to what the change I made to that static data. Here's the existing data, and then in the middle we can see what's happening. In this case, this change has to be moved forward. If I look at my stored procedure, something similar. On the left, I can see what's in my database. On the right-hand side, I see what's in version control, and then we can see that the changes are being made, and they're highlighted so that we know what's going on. Excuse me. So I can commit these changes to my version control system. So let's just say unneeded columns. Add a comment in here. You always want to put in a good comment that makes sense. Your comment should really be something that if you read it in 3 months, it'll make sense. You'll understand what's going on. So once I've done that, I've essentially taken all my changes and I've committed to the version control system. They're in sync now. If I go over here and look at my system, you'll see that the date has changed on this file, And if I were to look at this file, you can see there's the change I made, right? I don't have all the columns from this table. I don't have the star anymore. I've made those changes. If I actually looked in data as well, we'd see that that change is here as well. They've been committed. They haven't been pushed. I don't have a remote here for this Git repository. If they did, there would be a little blue button here that would say, do I want to push this to the remote repository? All right, so that's happened. Now what's going on? Well, that's actually kicked off a continuous integration build, and you can see here that this is actually running. Amy, why don't you run this poll while this is running for a minute, and I'll talk a little bit about what CI means. So we're curious if any of you use CI or what you're doing. Continuous integration is this idea that started over a decade ago. Really, it came out of this idea, I think in the early 80s, people started to come up with this idea that let's have a daily build of our software, because we know if we all work on our software, we all make changes as developers, and we try to then put all those changes together in 6 months, it's not going to compile. It's going to have problems. So some companies came with this idea, let's actually make these changes every day. And let's make sure that all the code from all developers puts together every day. And Microsoft does this. They do that now. Every day they rebuild SQL Server to make sure that there's no breaking changes from a compile standpoint. That's what we're doing here in the database world as well. It's difficult to do in the database world, but Redgate, we spent a lot of engineering time trying to make this happen. And so we actually are taking all of that code from the version control system. We're assembling a scratch database, and we're making sure that it compiles and that references are there. So if somebody were to make those changes offline, or somebody made a change in Management Studio, right? They just want to correct one little thing and they forget to compile it. If they still commit that to version control, we'll catch that as a problem. Again, we also run tests. So if you have coding standards, if you have potential issues with APIs, things that you want to catch in tests, we run those tests as part of the continuous integration process as well. And if the database doesn't pass the test, we feed that back to developers. They can fix that before they then recommit changes, which will kick off another CI process. The idea with this entire thing, this entire DLM process, is that I want to have low bars that keep getting higher and higher and higher as I move through the process, right? Developers have a very low bar. They just have to, store code. I guess they don't have any bar maybe. We use CI to put a small bar in there, potentially with standards-based testing, static code analysis, those kinds of things. The test environment is a slightly higher bar because we have QA people that look at it. Acceptance is a higher bar because we make sure it'll deploy to production. And then the highest bar is, does it work for our clients in production? So is that poll done? We bring that back now. All right, I can see myself, so I know it's done. You can see here my build ran. This is build. I changed my numbers recently, so it's 50, 15. The tests actually passed here. It ran 1 minute ago. And then it actually did a migration to Octopus Deploy, which we'll talk about in a minute. If I look through this, I'll actually get let me look at the test first. I can get a list of my tests. If any of these tests were to fail, I'd actually see them in red, and I could look and see what was the result there. Then if I look at my build log, what we'll see is there's a list of things that happen. And so we check out our code from our version control system, right? In this case, it's the Git version control system, where it puts it. We build this database, and this is where we're using the Redgate SQL CI plugin for TeamCity, which will plug into release management or TFS build or Bamboo or anything else. This actually is going to build a package, and it's going to build all my objects, as you can see here. And so I have a lot of detailed information here that for the most part you'll never look at unless there's something breaks, but it allows me to look at what's going on. Now that build occurred. Oops. Here's my configuration just so that we can see real quick. I link this to a version control system, and it's really easy to do. I do a talk on this, and maybe we'll schedule a webinar, but essentially I link to a version control system, and then I put steps in place. CI servers are built to assemble software, so it doesn't matter if you have Java software, .NET software, Python software, database software, they just run a series of steps. In this case, we're using some Redgate tools to make this very easy for you. We're giving you a form that essentially used to call into an exe with parameters, but now will go into PowerShell with various parameters to to explain how to do things, right? So for example, here's that DDL scripts, which is where my code is located, right here. It then builds a package, which is where I'll contain the state of version control at that point in time, and I'll use this to deploy to all my environments because version control can change, right? Version control could change every day, every minute as developers work. I need a place to build my software because it's a database, so I have to put this on a database information, or sorry, a database instance here, and then we'll integrate with DLM Dashboard. So all this works together. You'll notice I have 3 steps. I'll actually test the database. In this case, I'll run Tseagle tests, and then I'll upgrade my integration database, which could be on a different server, but in this case, it's on the same instance. Now, this update would include altering that stored procedure because I just changed that, as well as changing the data that's available. If I go to DLM Dashboard, I'll see that I have a new build here, right? In fact, the numbering has changed. This 50.15 right here is the same build that came out of my CI system, right? It's down here listed as the latest CI build as well. We picked that up in DLM Dashboard and just use that to tag this version of the schema as this number so that if this schema were to match this one, right, if test matches integration, it'll get the same number going forward. I'm going to leave this amber for now so that we can just watch it go through. All my CI stuff worked correctly. That's the first step. It passed all my tests. And you'll notice when I did my project, let me go back to the project here. I have 2 steps here, the build configuration, right? One of them is this build and test database, which is the build, the test, and the sync. The other one is migrate to Octopus Deploy, which is actually updating my integration environment. And we plug into Octopus in a similar way in that we take that package and develop an upgrade script, which is what is used to deploy. And to show you that that actually worked, let's look at our integration environment. So here's my development environment. Here's my integration environment. Let's look at the stored procedure first. We'll modify this. And what we find is that these look, well, it doesn't look the same because I closed that code, huh? Let's go back and get that code over here. Sorry, I usually do multiple windows here. Green prompt is telling me this is development environment. Purple is my integration environment. They're exactly the same. The code has moved back and forth, right, or moved forward in the environment. I didn't make the change. In terms of my table and integration, there's my RSS feeds. There's that new item that I in fact added. Now obviously this ID came out of an identity column. I could fix that as well, but that came out of there, right, where it picked up the information that I put in version control from the development database and moved it to integration. So now I have these 2 environments in sync. Things are looking good. Let's move forward. So here's Octopus Deploy. Here's my SimpleTalk project. You can see I've got multiple versions in place here as I've Octopus picks up its own versioning. I could sync this up with my CI, but I typically don't worry about this because I will have many more CI builds that will, pass and fail than I will actually deploy forward because sometimes things go forth. I want to make sure that this code works, but it's not ready to deploy. In this case, you can see my 4.2.68 from today has actually worked. I'm going to start deploying this right now just because it takes a couple of minutes to work. While we're doing that, Amy, do you want to run that last poll about release management? So I don't meet a lot of clients and customers that run release management. And Arnie, do you see many people running release management?
I'd say maybe about 50% of customers that I work with. It's definitely not a common practice, but a lot of people are starting to sort of move in that direction.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think I certainly don't see 50%, but you work with, I think, more customers that are interested in this than I do. I meet a lot of the average people, and most people kind of just ad hoc build a script and deploy it, I think. But it is becoming more prevalent, right? Microsoft is pushing it. They purchased a company and they turned their product into release management. Octopus, these guys built a fantastic product, I think, for trying to track all your different applications and what's being deployed. Bamboo from Atlassian does a great job as well. We're starting to see more companies that realize that the developers and DBAs that deploy stuff from dev to test, they often make changes, they forget things, and when they go to production, they make mistakes, and they have to correct them on the fly. And for most of our businesses and our organizations, that's a problem. That's an issue. So let's close that poll and come back here so we can see what's going on. Now, this deployment completed. You can see that everything's green, which is good. Green is always nice. It says deployed to testing. I now have the promote to acceptance environment, or sorry, the acceptance button here. I'm going to kick that off and then go back and look at how this works. So we'll let that run. Let me come back to my dashboard. So you can see my dashboard. I actually have 4 applications here in my system. They're called projects, but these would correspond to my 4 applications. And then across the top, we have all of my environments. And they're all at different versions, right? Things have been deployed. You know, for example, this blogs.redgate hasn't been deployed. I've got production at a couple versions behind integration. You know, same thing for some of these areas. My SimpleTalk one, I've got the same version, integration and testing. They've been deployed successfully. This is definitely more of an ops tool here. It's deploying to acceptance now. If I look at DLM Dashboard, you can see that this has tracked the deployment to test, and it notices that this version of the schema is the same as in integration, so it's tracked that correctly and it knows what's going on. And again, it's amber because there was an update that occurred, and we know that what it is, right? We understand the version of the schema, so we're just tracking it here. I can configure this just like my CI software. I can build this project to run any way I want, and you'll see, in fact, if I look at this process, there's a number of things going on here. I just put these steps together, and I have to code them. I have to make sure that they do the correct things that need to happen for software to be deployed. But once I code them, it happens the same way every time. And I only update this if my process changes or it finds a hole. Now, in my case, let me find where my release is. You'll notice this was blue a minute ago. It went to this amber color. That's because there's a review step in here that says, let's look at the details of what's going on here. And it's not assigned to anybody right now. Now, in the past, typically people review things when they go to production, but I've never liked that because when we decide to deploy to production, I've got to let clients know and business analysts and people are ready. They're in a hurry. They want things to go through. And if I find issues, they don't want to stop the deployment. To me, it's much easier to catch this in a test environment. And so in this case, you'll see here I have this proceed and abort, so I can allow this deployment or stop it. Over here in the artifacts area, I also have information about what's going to actually happen. Excuse me. So if I want to look at the actual script as a DBA, I can do that. I can sit here and go, here's the script, and you can see here there's the alter, there's the change of data. But we actually, as Redgate, we produce a much better file here. That's an HTML file that lets me see what happens at a global level. So obviously I have the script here, you can see that, and this is the actual script that runs. So once this is produced, this is the same script that runs in all subsequent environments. So if I'm deploying this across multiple database servers, it's the same script that runs. If I'm going from test to acceptance to production, it's the same script that runs. You can see here's my alter for the store procedure. Here's my data change as well. You know, and then there's stuff to kind of track this in the transaction, let me know what's going on. If there were warnings, perhaps if I was, you know, taking a column from not null to null or vice versa, there would be a warning here. Anytime there's a potential for data loss, there are warnings. And then I see all my objects here. Now, in this case, I have 2 modified objects, and I get the version control standard here of kind of a pinkish for takeaway and green for addition, so I can see what's happening. Same thing for my data here. I'll see what's going on. In this case, I only have new changes. I don't have all my other objects, but I certainly could include them, and we have a link here to explain how to do that if you want to see all of the objects in there as well that exist and that aren't going to be affected. Now in this case, I can, I'm going to approve this and let this go so we can see. But this step didn't come about when I ran the test environment. And you can see here I've got all these steps that occur. In this case, there was the review step at step 4. You remember that. If I go back to this process, what you'll see is that step 4 is review the database change, but it only happens in the acceptance environment. So not only do I code these changes, like here's a backup that only happens in acceptance, I decide when these run. So create database script actually occurs everywhere. We're going to create that release, deploy our web app, all the things we do. And this allows you to easily move data, or really all your software, right? Your data, your web application, your client application, anything from environment to environment. That's what it's built to do. And so we can see acceptance is actually deployed. I've now got the same schema here, and if I look, it's the same thing, the same store procedure that I did before. And where's my management studio? If I were to look, certainly if I look in test, I'll see the same changes. So let me click over here and look at that store procedure in test. Again, I'm color-coded amber, I don't know what that is, mustard for test is there. And my acceptance environment, it's a blue. We can see it's the same version that's in development here. And let's pop to production so we can do this before we do the deployment and you can see what's going on. I know you've got a few questions. I'm going to get to them in just a second. Let me just do this. So production is still select star here. Came out of Management Studio. Let's go deploy this to production. So my simple top process, I hit deploy. And you can see here that from the ops standpoint, it's very easy, right? I can just say, hey, deploy this, right? Because we've already done all the coding ahead of time to build this process into Octopus. So now, as developers continue to make changes, I just press buttons to do deployments. Certainly we could have issues. If we do, we then perhaps alter this process, add a step, delete a step, whatever we need to do, go back to the developers and say, hey, you're not including everything into the process from the very beginning, right? Perhaps they've added data or they've dropped a foreign key or added a foreign key and it doesn't match up. We can handle anything that needs to happen. The key is I want this deployment process to be repeatable. All right, it's deployed to production now, it says. I think it's doing some cleanup here. Oh no, there it is there. Let's go back and look at production again. In production, I now have the same version of the code deployed through, and let's just look at this right here. You'll see that I've deployed that thing through here today as well. All right, I've kind of run through this whole process, from development to production, kind of easily moving changes through. Certainly there are different complications that can come up, but for the most part, you can code around any of these changes. It doesn't matter whether I'm doing this in CI with my server here, and I just add steps to my build configuration, or I'm in my release management software and I add the steps there. The whole idea is that I have a smooth way to move all my changes from one way to the other. So Arnie, do we have any good questions out there we want to talk about now?
We do, yeah. There's actually a couple around deployments. So the first one is from Charles, and he's asking about, deployments to tables that have, large number of records. Like say, we have 500 million records, and someone adds a column with a not null and a default. So does constant deployment catch that?
So when you say catch that, do you mean that I don't want to allow it or that I'm going to allow it? I mean, certainly I can, in fact, put in a test here. So when let me just look at this real quick. Let's build and deploy. One of my build steps is, in fact, test step. Okay, and you'll notice in here, what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to run every test. And I could run certain tests, but I'm running every test. Those tests exist over here in my development database. Let me bring it up. They're Tseagle T tests, and the easiest way to see them, we have a product called SQL Test from Redgate that overlays Tseagle T. And so you can see I've got SQL Cop, I've got a number of tests, and I've got unit tests here. If I was worried about not null columns or large schema changes, I might throw a test in here that would fail when somebody did an alter to a particular table or a large table or something like that. And the reason I would fail it here is that I wouldn't want it to go through my CI process without somebody allowing it. And there's ways to add exceptions to tests, but really what it would do is I'd want it to fail in CI so that the entire team or the manager or somebody would notice that we're making this change, and then we would in fact talk about it and say, all right, how do we want to handle this? And then add the exception so that it would pass the test moving forward, change the code, whatever we do. Making those changes to a large table, when I do it in the actual script, there's no magic here. There's no magical way to make a change to a large table and not have an impact. So I need to determine how do I want to make that change, right? Do I want to add a not null column and allow it to just go through it? Do I want to, make a copy of the table, add the column there, move the data over, and then do a schema, a metadata switch where I rename two tables? I can do whatever I want. The key is I have to decide how to code that, and I could certainly code that here. In this case, what I would do is that would actually be a migration script. Let me close these down. Where I would add specific code that said, hey, let's build a new table. Let's add the column there with the default. Let's transfer the data, and then we'll rename both tables. I would do that as a migration script, and that migration script would get picked up and executed across all the environments. But there's no magic to making database changes. All we're doing is automating what you would do manually. Hopefully that makes sense. Go ahead.
So there's a question from David Wilson, which I think you kind of answered just now with regards to migration. So he's asking about schema changes that require some data manipulation. Is there a way to provide custom scripts to handle that?
Absolutely, and that's what I would do here. If I'm gonna get my database here. Migrations aren't on Git yet. They're working on that right now. If I was on TFS, I would actually just have add a migration script here. This button would be live, and it would just give me a code window that we're tracking in Management Studio. And so I could write whatever code I want. And there's actually a SQL Source Control version 5 beta out right now. I was just looking at that actually. I'll pop that for a second. But they're giving you the ability to do a lot of stuff with migration scripts. Here's the SQL Source Control 5 beta. But you have the ability to then work with your migration scripts and edit them, and you would do whatever change you need to flow that through CI in your release management system. What else we got?
We have another one around deployments. So how does this handle DAG packs instead of scripts?
All right, so for DAG packs, now DAG packs are a format, that captures all this information together and does it. We have a format as well. Let me come over here and look. We're separate from DAG packs, and so I think I'm trying to think where my artifacts are here. The DAG pack is a different format that we don't really support right now. We're debating and talking about that, but essentially, if you wanted to use DAG packs, look here. Here's my artifacts. Your DAG pack essentially looks similar to this. Okay, it's got slightly different information, but you essentially have a list of tables and all this kind of stuff in it. From the DAG pack perspective, there are tools that allow you to pack and unpack DAG packs to apply a DAG pack essentially to a database. You would have to, the way that you would do it now, you would in essence code that in here, and you would code that in here as well. So your process here. So for example, when I create this release, this is actually building a PowerShell commandlet. What this is happening is here's all these conditions here, all these parameters, all these things. They're based off this code. So they're essentially running this PowerShell script. You'll notice here there's PowerShell, there's C#, there's Bash. You would code whatever you need to do for a DAG pack into here. Obviously you wouldn't have this nice form. You would have a step that you're building as custom code that says do this, do this, do this to deploy this DAG pack. Okay, some things we do better than DAG packs, right? Some things DAG packs I think handle slightly different than us, but either way, if you want to use DAG packs, you do the same thing, exact same thing I'm doing here, right? You want a CI process, you want a deployment process, but you have to do all the coding, right? Or you pay Redgate money and then we do all the coding so that it's smoother when you deploy from the developer's instance to production.
Thanks, Steve. And there's also a couple more questions. So one is about DLM Dashboard, and the question is mainly around installation. So Scott Severs is wondering which server should you typically, I guess, deploy DLM Dashboard for tracking across multiple environments where multiple developers can actually see it.
Where would you deploy this? For me, I would probably pick my acceptance server. You know, I know it sounds maybe strange, but I would pick something that I wouldn't do it in production because I don't like doing that. I'd rather have it in development and punch holes through the production for what we need here. But typically, this web server could live anywhere, really. You know, this installs on where it's tracking things is a Redgate database. We have just a couple of tables where we're kind of tracking what's going on, and then what happens is this application, this website, just pings all of those databases to pull back information, understand what's changed. All right, so this is kind of like, you know, software monitoring, like SQL Monitor or OpenView or something else. You just need a place to run this from. I'd want a stable server, so like I don't like dev servers because people muck with them a little too much. I prefer to put this web server on something a little more stable, but it could really live anywhere. And then it talks to each of these servers, and I configure these. You know, like I can move these between pipelines if I want to. I can move these between the different environments that we have. I can have multiple machines at each one of these levels. So if I had 5 production machines, I'd have 5 production items listed here. As a matter of fact, if I just move something over, let me just move something so we can see that. Let's move this to the simple talk pipeline. You'll see now I have 2 instances here, right? 2 databases that are being tracked on this pipeline. Let me move that back so I don't forget about things. But you know, you can really put it anywhere. I mean, Arnie, do you have guidance that you give that's maybe different?
No, pretty much the same. We typically recommend customers to just install it on a within the local network where, you know, they can either host it on a web server or on a server that is accessible by all team members.
Yeah, I mean, you know, there's all kinds of stuff. You know, this is free, by the way. DLM Dashboard is like free as in beer. It's completely free. So you know, I think we give you 50 databases now, but maybe that's going to change. But you just, you know, you add all the servers you want and do this, but you just install this somewhere, and you know, you can download it today and install it, and it's free. And if nothing else, it just gives you a view of what's going on. You can choose how I do notifications to where they're going on. There is configuration to limit who can see what. You know, there's some work there. Where's the users are here? Sorry. So I can do users and permissions here. You know, I don't really have this in my demo environment because it's really just me doing it. But you know, you can do that. And then we have these things all over the place. So if there's something you don't see that you need, just ask us or tell us what you need. All right. What else?
Okay. So a question from Alexander. So does Redgate have anything to check and enforce Tseagle coding standards on the CI side?
So SQL Cop is there. So it's not from Redgate. This is free. It uses Tseagle T, but you can go to SQL T and it's, sorry, SQL Cop, and there's a bunch of stuff here. There's SQL, and is it SQL and Lite? Yeah, Ubisoft has this SQL and Lite thing that does static code analysis. So that's kind of standards, you know, not quite the same, but they do that. We don't provide anything specifically. If you get SQL test, if I add a database here, you know, just pick something at random, you'll notice that what it does is it says there's a couple things that we have to do, right? This is Tseagle T requirements, but we'll add the static analysis tests, which are standards-based tests, if you want to add them. But these are easy, these are simple tests. So if you look at this, this is just a store procedure. There's nothing magic about what this does right here. You can write your own standards-based tests, and you know, for whatever you need. Some people like this, some people don't. But you could write. I could certainly write a test that says, "Don't allow somebody to add a not null column." Right? I mean, I could look for that. So All right, what else?
Great. Yeah, there's one more from David Wilson. So can you talk about how DLM detects changes in production to bring back to dev? So
Yep.
let's say DBA adds an index to solve an immediate customer problem.
Yeah, so let's look at that. So let's come up here. I just want to see what I have here. Oops, there it is. So I have one index, right? Let me add an index to production, and we'll say that this is great. I don't know what I just added, but that's okay. So what we'll actually see here in a second is that it'll actually detect that I've made a change here, and it'll go red. And DLM Dashboard is not doing anything magic, right? What it's just doing is saying, let me look at what the schema looks like. Let me look at my list of known schemas, and if I have a match, for example, here I have a match, I'll just mark this and say, hey, it's changed, right? It was 14, it's now 15, I know what the schema looks like. In production, though, you see I just added that index, it's unrecognized. This is what we call drift, and this happens all the time, right? Production DBA's got to solve a problem, adds recompile to a procedure, it does something else. All this is doing is checking drift. And the whole idea in this drift is that we want to let you know that something happened, right? Maybe I dropped an index, maybe I added an index. So when I see this, right, I know who did it. What I can certainly do is I can say this is version 50.15.1, right? I can do whatever I want here. But most importantly, I can take this code, I can acknowledge those changes, and we know then that this is what we want. But what I would actually do is say, come back to development, let's stick this thing in here, right? And then I go to source control and I say, whoops, where am I? Here, let's catch that index, and this is a good argument for production DBAs to at least, if not have access to development or have a development environment, to work with the developers to say, let's add this new index from prod, right? And I should say why, right? Hopefully I have some knowledge of why I did that. And that would go through the whole process again, right? That will kick off in here, and we'll see. That's going to kick off another build and see if it causes a problem. If I've got tests in there that look for too many indexes or something else, they'll fail or they'll let me know. But I feed things back to production, and then I run them back through the process to make sure that even though they're in production, we account for them in the entire process. They pass our tests, they're looked at, something else. Certainly I don't have to deploy this CI build, excuse me, the CI build that just kicked off. I don't have to deploy this forward. I can leave an integration, wait for other changes to catch up, and then deploy all those. But I feed things back through, and DLM Dashboard just makes it easy for me to go through here and see what I've done, so that if somebody comes in and says, well, that was weird, what's going on? I can say, well, we know today I acknowledge these changes, and here is the change that actually occurred, right? So in this case, these changes occurred, and here's the one that was added. Right, these were unacknowledged.
Yeah. And a good thing is also that it sends email notifications, right? So if a DBA makes a change to a production database and you want to notify, some individuals, so that way one of them can actually go back and apply that change to dev, you can do that through the email notifications of DLM Dashboard.
Right, and you can see here, this is 16 now running, it's going to update the database and all that stuff. All right, a few more minutes. Any one or two questions left before we call it a day?
Yeah, so there's just one question regarding instant clone. So Scott Severs is wondering, when's that planned for release?
No idea, Scott. It's in beta right now. Please sign up for the beta. I don't know, where is it at? Instant clone. There we go. Wow, there's the PDF. It's an alpha. It's in beta now. It must not. I don't know where the site is.
Yeah, I saw an email a couple of days ago saying that it was going into beta, but
here. If you come to SQL Server Central, right here, there's a link to join the beta. So go join it and see, give us some feedback, or not, right? But the more people are in the beta, the quicker it'll go out of production, because I know a team kicked off, a formal team, like 3 or 4 weeks ago, to turn this into actually a live product, because it's kind of been in the R&D phase. And so the beta is the result of that, and they're trying to drive this forward. So hopefully soon, Scott. I think it's a fantastic product for DLM purposes, to help you move stuff through to new environments and create those environments very quickly. So no information. I mean, I don't even have anything. I can't tell you, right? There's just no information right now. It's in beta. So, all right, I think we got to call it quits. The last thing I'll show you is that, I did update this schema here in production, and you'll notice that it came back here, that it recognized that that version existed in integration, even though that change was made in production and fed back through development. So let me find my slides again. Hopefully I've kind of walked you through the entire process. DLM just makes some sense. Today was Git, TeamCity, and Octopus Deploy. I think next month we're doing TFS more as a stack. Arnie, is that right?
Correct, yeah. We'll do TFS as source control and a build system, as well as release management for doing.
So that'll be the complete TFS solution, right? So source control, CI, and release management all in the TFS stack. Arnie will do that one, actually. If you need more information, DLM at Redgate is a great place to just send information. And then we've got some workshops, and there's some training if you need that as well from our partners. I also want to mention JetBrains is doing a webinar tomorrow with Jerry Palermo from ClearMeasure. They're they're an advanced software engineering firm, so they use this stuff to actually deliver software for clients. So they really know this stuff. But they're gonna talk about continuous delivery tomorrow from the TeamCity side, and be a little more general, not the database side, but just generally the CI thing. So CI/CD tomorrow, if you want to check that out, there's the link. If you go to the JetBrains site, though, you'll find it, or I think it's on the ClearMeasure site as well. If you've got more questions, please just send them to DLM at Redgate. Reference the webinar. We'll get you answers. And then this is being recorded. We'll stick a recording up in the next few days. Friday, Monday, we'll get that out there along with the Q&A as well. So we'll have all the questions answered out there for you. So. Arnie, thanks for being here today. Everyone, thanks for coming, and have a great day.
Thanks, Steve. Thanks, everyone.
All right. Bye-bye.